Hello and welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabarty. Today is February 21st. We are recording this on a Wednesday afternoon, and as we are still just a day away from the NBA getting back and started up, we're going to be looking at some NFL offseason storylines, specifically today looking at the quarterback decisions that some of these teams have to make, as well as some of the NFL contenders' biggest offseason needs in terms of addressing it through the draft and free agency. So we'll be touching on that in the first half of the show. Then in the second half, we will be talking about the new format in college football playoffs that was just approved yesterday, before finally wrapping off the show with some interesting drama that took place over the course of the past 24 hours in terms of Doc Rivers after one of his former players, JJ Redick, went on ESPN and sort of ripped into him. So we will be getting into all of that. But before we do, just a reminder to like and follow wherever you may be following us. And getting into our first segment here, talking about the QB contract decisions in the offseason. Now, we've already talked some as far as which teams need quarterbacks. We talked about this during the Justin Fields sweepstakes almost, as far as what teams could potentially make moves for him. We'll be getting more so into draft-focused talk about the quarterback positions as this offseason goes on. But today I wanted to talk about some of the guys that are currently already with their teams, are under contract for next year, but are now eligible for extensions, and whether or not these franchises should look to get the deals done. So the list of starting quarterbacks that are entering their final year of their contract includes Dak Prescott, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Jordan Love, and all of the 2021 draft class, those quarterbacks. But it seems like despite 5 of them being drafted in the first round, we are likely only looking at one of them being the starting quarterback for their franchise next year, which would be Trevor Lawrence with the Jacksonville Jaguars. There is a little bit of speculation that Mac Jones actually could continue to start for the Patriots next year, but Chad Graff of The Athletic also reported earlier today that they said the most likely option is still them using the 3rd overall pick on a quarterback. There's also this Justin Fields thing, but I would imagine that any team that trades for him is going to be giving him a contract. I would imagine that that's sort of implied, but as we still don't know what the future holds for Justin Fields in terms of where he will be playing football next year, we're going to hold off on that conversation as well. Sticking with specifically what we're going to be talking about today is the 4 guys that I mentioned, more of the veteran guys not on rookie contracts, but are up for extensions this season: Dak, Tua, Goff, and Love. So I think that for 3 of these teams, it is I wouldn't call it a lock or anything, but I think that there are 3 teams of this group that should absolutely be looking to getting their extensions done this offseason. Jordan Love is a little bit of a no-brainer to me. He signed a very team-friendly extension in replace of the 5th-year option. He did that last May, and that takes him through this season as well. So he's going to be due for a big payday, and I would imagine that the Packers are probably on the same page here with him. Now, is there still maybe a little bit to prove with Jordan Love? Yes, but he had a very solid season for the most part. I know that there were dips along the course of the season, but I think for the most part, Jordan Love, he was also sort of the rallying force for the Packers when they started to turn their season around, and I think that delivering the playoff run sort of sealed it for him. Now, is it guaranteed he's going to be sort of the continuation of the franchise guy like we've seen with the previous timeline with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers and now him. I'm not totally sure. I mean, they showed plenty of clips of that little jump throw that he did, throws off the back foot, weird stuff like that, where it did look eerily similar to Aaron Rodgers in that sense. And the way that their season ended, the final interception that he threw looked very Brett Favre-ish, not necessarily in a good way, the interception that sealed their fate on their final drive against the 49ers. But I do think that there is a ton of potential for Jordan Love there, and they should be looking to extend him long term. I don't really think that there's a ton of benefit of him rolling into next season. I think that the market is only going to go up for him, and I would look to get it done sooner rather than later. You have a very young team. They're still not in great financial situation as a whole, but they already have Love under contract for this season as it is, so that won't directly impact what they can do this offseason, but it sort of helps them retool and get themselves looking towards the future under Jordan Love. Jared Goff is interesting because, again, I wouldn't put him as 100%. If he didn't succeed per se, I wouldn't be entirely shocked, but that being said, he had an incredible year. I mean, really, it was early on in that Detroit stint where I know that they were still very bad to begin the 2022-23 season, but Jared Goff showed, some real promise for them there. And for somebody who had taken a team to the Super Bowl in the past, even though at the time it was a little bit in spite of him, but he has been able to elevate his play over the past couple seasons. I thought that he was extremely impressive in their playoff run. And if you look at that 49ers game, I really don't think that there's very much else he could have done to win that NFC Championship game. I don't put it in the hands of him at all. Now, it's been a very fun story to see the way that they have transformed Jared Goff, who was a little bit of a throwaway in that Matthew Stafford trade a few years ago. And then obviously, the Rams go on to win the Super Bowl in their first season with Stafford. So that almost makes Jared Goff look even worse just by comparison, because it just only fueled the narrative that it was Jared Goff holding them back from actually winning it. But he's been able to, and give credit to the Detroit team as a whole and the franchise and Dan Campbell, the coach, to be able to transform what was this throwaway into an asset with a good amount of value, because he's been making, $20+ million, and it seemed like his career was just about over when he was on his way out of the Rams organization. But now he is going to be in his early 30s and due for a contract extension. His number one running mate in Amon-Ra St. Brown is also due for an extension this offseason. I would imagine, especially the way that Goff, looks for St. Brown so frequently, I think that the team is on board with Jared Goff. They are bought into him. They're bought into the system as a whole. And I think that Ben Johnson as well. I think that it's kind of telling. Maybe it's the fact that by the time they were done in the playoffs, the options weren't quite as great in terms of head coaching jobs. It was Washington and Seattle, but when he came out, he was willing to give this thing another shot, and he said his prime objective was to win the Super Bowl. I think that he thinks they have a great chance, and I would agree with that, the way that the NFC is open and the way that this roster has as much talent as it does. Some of their key players are from that past draft class, and they have a lot of potential. So I think that Jared Goff should also be a name. Is he going to get record-setting money? I don't think I'd go that far, but I wouldn't be necessarily upset if he ends up getting, $30-35 million annually. I think that that's very fair. The price of quarterbacks going, and I think that I might even be lowballing him a little bit on that one as well. Where this gets to be really interesting is with Dak Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa. Dak, I think, should definitely be re-signed by the Cowboys, but definitely also does come with a little bit of baggage because of the fact that the price is going to be extremely high. NFL insider Jordan Schultz just yesterday said that he thinks Dak is going to be getting over $60 million a year annually on his next deal. Obviously, that is a ton of money to lock up in one guy, and someone in Dak Prescott that hasn't necessarily proven, to be one of the elite top tier quarterbacks. But I think that also, when you look at Dak, I don't think he's held them back through any of these runs, really. I think that he is coming off of just about his best season. You remember he was in the MVP conversations for a lot of this season, and I wouldn't put it on him. Whatever was going on between him and CeeDee Lamb during that divisional round game against the Packers was definitely very strange. Or that was the wild card round, sorry, but definitely very strange. They weren't on the same page, and as a result, their offense was slow to start. Sure, they got going towards the end, but at that point, it was too little, too late. I thought that loss was more about the defense, though. It does get interesting because you're talking about $60 million for one player. CeeDee Lamb also is going to be needing a contract soon. Micah Parsons is going to be needing a new contract soon. So you have a lot of guys to pay for here, and wrapping all that money up just in Dak Prescott is risky, I'll say that. But I do think that he is probably a top 10 quarterback in the league now. I'll come back some other day with an actual list itself, but is he Patrick Mahomes? No. Is he Josh Allen? No. But I think he's, on that Kirk Cousins tier. He can definitely, I think, be on that Matt Stafford tier, where he's maybe not necessarily going to single-handedly elevate you to a different level. But if you have talent around him, I think that he can win. I think that, for me, I haven't been a big Mike McCarthy guy in the past, so I think that there have been other issues here. Like I mentioned, I thought it was their defense, the reason why they lost this year. But I think that they are going to be a little bit handicapped here, especially as Jerry Jones says they want to be all in this year. Now, he hasn't been entirely committal on the idea of getting Dak under an extension, so if this doesn't happen this offseason, I wouldn't be shocked, but I think that it is probably the direction they will and should go. I do not think that the Dolphins should extend Tua Tagovailoa this offseason, and I know that that comes with risks as well. I have not been a very big Tua guy for the majority of his career, and it doesn't sound like a lot of people are as a whole. I think that he executes the Mike McDaniel offense very well, and the relationship that he and McDaniel have is definitely a powerful one. I think that you have to give McDaniel a lot of credit for the confidence issues that Tua was going through early in his career when he was getting all of the blame. If you remember, Brian Flores, who was their head coach before McDaniel, was very low on him, and him and the front office butted heads about the idea of having him be the quarterback for the future. So I think that it's been, very compelling to see this little bit of a redemption with Tua. But that being said, I also don't have very much confidence in him long term as being even the level of a Dak Prescott to, be a guy that, I'm not saying you can't win with Tua around, with surrounding your team around Tua, but I think that anytime adversity really comes up with Tua, it is a concern. I do think that Dak Prescott could potentially put together, a field goal winning drive, a touchdown winning drive. I just don't see that with Tua. I think that when the lights get brightest, it becomes very difficult for him. And part of the reason I say this, I think the Cowboys are a little more handicapped in what they can do. Now, their Trey Lance is on the roster. I think that we can probably turn the page on him, but he's somebody who was drafted number 3 overall in that 2021 class. When they made the move, I'm like, hey, maybe something could happen here if Dak were to fall short, but he responded with the best season of his career. I just don't think that they have a lot of options, especially considering where they view themselves. Now, the Dolphins are in a little bit of a similar situation, but I think that it is more about the system that is there in place with Miami than Tua itself. And because the offense is such a well-oiled machine, you have Tyreek Hill, you have Jalen Waddle, you have a very good run scheme behind you. I think that you can get away with not paying Tua, and a little bit of this Kyle Shanahan effect, if you would remember, McDaniel, Shanahan come from the same tree. I think the coaching tree, that is. I think that Tua can be replaced by somebody else at a much cheaper price and not see a significant drop off. I think the Cowboys do significantly drop off if they don't pay Dak Prescott, where it's not fair. And, I want to preface this already, but if you look at their past 2 seasons, Skylar Thompson had a better playoff performance than Tua did as the starting quarterback for the Dolphins in the playoffs. Now, the Chiefs' defense this season and the weather elements that the game was being played under, obviously a much more difficult task than Skylar Thompson had playing the Bills' defense last year, but that was not a lackluster group necessarily. They were a lot healthier than we saw, the version of them that we saw at least this past playoffs. And I think that the Dolphins could get away with sort of going a little bit cheaper in the quarterback position until they find, that top end guy that's really worth paying long term. I think that, I'm going to get more and more into the draft as we get closer to it, and I will talk about college football later. I'm definitely not a college football expert, so I hope that this doesn't come off as a little bit of a lazy comparison, but I think that Michael Penix would be a very solid fit in that Miami Dolphins offense, where you have the deep balls, the outside of the numbers players in Tyreek and Waddle. Struggles a little bit when you get pressure on him up front, but I think that's similar to Tua, especially with the injuries we've seen in the past. He's very much not mobile, not a mobile version, at least that we saw pre-concussions that he suffered last year. I think that him and Michael Penix share a lot of similarities. Now, Tua better inside the numbers. He is maybe a little bit better in terms of accuracy and anticipation, but Penix is somebody that is probably going to fall outside of the first round, and I think that if the Dolphins could get him for a day 2 pick, that would definitely be something that would intrigue me. Now, if that's not the case, I do kind of think that they could still just play out the season with Tua on the contract he's currently on and reevaluate the position next offseason if you think that, and we can see here, because if he balls out next year, then yes, the contract is going to be higher, but at least you'll have more confidence in him. Me, myself, right now, I just don't have that level of confidence in him. And I don't know, we'll see. The injury concerns and all of that, which also do exist for Michael Penix, I'll say that as well. And if they draft Michael Penix, I'm not even saying that he has to start over Tua, but he can be in the building. You can sort of get that comparison. And I don't know, I just think that it is a very risky move for the Dolphins to try and get out ahead of Tua, because at best you're saving yourself, I don't know, maybe maximum $5 million annually. Just, sort of rough estimate there. And worst case, you are costing yourself wrapping all this money up in a guy who is not cut out for the job. So that's my thoughts on it. I'm sure we will get more on that subject as the off-season progresses. But for now, we're going to be taking our first break. And when we come back on the other side, we are going to be going over some of the biggest needs for NFL contenders for next season. So stick with us. We will be right back.